Every single phase of private practice has its own unique challenges and its own unique opportunities. Whether you're starting and growing a solo practice, getting a group practice going, whether you're already a group practice boss, or you want to go big and go national with the skills you have, every phase has its challenges. And doing that in community with people and learning from other folks and having that guidance is so, so important. That's why we have a membership community for every phase of practice. Next Level Practice is for solo practitioners to help you get organized, fill up your practice, and get that solo practice rocking. We have small groups, we have accountability partners, we have live events every single week. And also, if in the first 3 months, in the first 90 days, you're not satisfied, we have a 90-day money-back guarantee. Next, we have Group Practice Launch. Group Practice Launch is a 6-month program specifically for you to launch a group practice. We have weekly meetings with that as well as guided courses, and you get full access to Next Level Practice. And you're guaranteed to hire someone in the first 6 months, or you get to go through it again for free. Next, we have Group Practice Boss. Group Practice Boss is for people that have group practices and want to continue to grow. All those ups and downs of having a group practice, of changing that mindset, being in community with other people, and getting that support from us. We, with that as well, have weekly meetings, and you get to come to Next Level Practice events as well. So that's 8 meetings a month that you could come to live to get extra help. Also, there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. Lastly, we have Audience Building Academy. Audience Building Academy is specifically for people that are ready to level up and go national. Maybe you want to get a traditionally published book, have a podcast, launch some e-products and e-courses and scalable income. Audience Building Academy is specifically for you so that you can level up and go national. We'll walk you through exactly how you go from having a solo or a group practice to going national. We'll help you build your email list, get on podcasts, and really level up. So no matter what your phase is, we have a membership community for you. Over at practiceofthepractice.com/memberships, you can read all about them and sign up. Go in there and decide which membership phase is for you and join today. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/memberships. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1158. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I hope you are doing awesome today. We are helping therapists build thriving private practices that they absolutely love. We help counselors, we help coaches, we help psychiatrists, massage therapists. The major kind of part of our audience still is therapists and counselors, but we've had a lot more psychiatrists joining our membership programs, people that have mega practices, just getting started, sustainable solo. We have really broadened our membership community, and we're actually looking at potentially rebranding it as one name and then having different tracks within it. Within our memberships, we have multiple tracks. So we have our Next Level Practice track, which is for people that are just getting going, starting their practice. We have our Sustainable Solo Practice track, which is for people that have a solo practice that's going well, that could be coaching or counseling. And then we have our Group Practice Launch track, which is for people that are adding their first clinicians. And then the Group Practice Boss track. And so if you are looking for extra support, head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/membership, and you'll see all the different ways that you can get involved to get support to get to that next level of thriving and loving your practice. So I am so excited to have Minaa B with me. Minaa is a licensed social worker, mental health educator, and author of Owning Our Struggles. She is also the founder of a mental health consulting practice where she collaborates with organizations to help them develop psychological safety. Additionally, Minaa is the host of the podcast Mindful with Minaa and is also a member of the Mental Health Advisory Committee for Wondermind, a mental fitness company co-founded by Selena Gomez. An expert in her field, Minaa has been featured in various media outlets, including Red Table Talk, Peace of Mind with Taraji, Oprah Daily, Katie Couric Media, Essence, and more. Minaa currently resides in New York City. Minaa, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Hi, Joel. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. I feel like we have so many directions that we can go in. I mean, you've transitioned from as much counseling into coaching. You help businesses. Your social media following is exploding and has exploded. There's a lot of different directions, but let's just start with what's exciting you about your work right now?
What's exciting me? I would say that doing a lot of work recently on community care has been very exciting to me. I think that over the last few years, a lot of people have been struggling in building healthy relationships, whether it be romantic or platonic. And I think that that is something that I am doing a lot of work around trying to contribute to that conversation and provide people with tools and healing. And that's what pretty much the foundation of my book, Owning Our Struggles, is all about teaching people how to cultivate community care and how to heal from trauma through community care. So that is something that kind of keeps me excited often. I launched my podcast, Mindful with Mina, in February of this year. So it was a new project for me and it's still going. It's a weekly podcast, episodes released every Tuesday. And I'm really excited about it. I was really nervous about releasing a podcast, believe it or not, and it was more so because of the labor that's involved in keeping one up and keeping it going. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you know. But it's been a very fun experience for me. And so I'm really excited to see how the podcast is going to continue to take shape in 2025. And I'm just currently exploring different ventures or different projects that I want to attach to the project, to the podcast, I mean, to continue to let it grow.
I love all that. Yeah, I think that, part of being a any sort of person that's putting information out in the world is figuring out where people are resonating with that right now. And some of it's that spaghetti at the wall being like, okay, I'm going to do 50 or 100 episodes of a podcast, see if that helps my brand, to see if that grows things, see if I enjoy it. And then, just kind of trying new things of ways to communicate what you're working on. Now, you mentioned especially your work around kind of your book and helping people grow both romantic and platonic relationships. And I know that's one of the specialties of people that you help. Now, you started to transition a number of years ago from counseling into coaching. I'd love to hear about that decision to transition and what was helpful in that.
So it honestly felt like a decision where I had to choose between counseling and coaching, and I'll share why. So during the year of 2020, I was still seeing clients and I was working specifically in community mental health, working with a variety of ages, mostly adults. And that was also the year, due to the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, isolation, people experiencing different forms of loneliness, the hate crimes happening within the Asian American community. There were so many things happening on an environmental level, on a racial justice level, on a social level in the year of 2020 that a lot of corporations started to come to me and asking me to come to their organization to do trainings around burnout, to do trainings around psychological safety, to work with leaders or managers around different tools that they can be cultivating to ensure that the well being and mental health of their employees were taken care of in the midst of us dealing with all of the injustices happening in the world, as well as all of the traumas that were taking place during that year that was really impacting people. And we know that regardless of what happens in the world, unfortunately work does not shut down. Work is a system that we always have to engage in regardless of what's happening in our environment, and that's very hard on the human body to have to endure various forms of trauma and then still show up and engage in productivity and work as your best self in a work organization, especially if you're having to lead a team. And so, because all of those inquiries were flooding my inbox, I got to a place where I honestly could not sustain working a full time job, doing community mental health, while also now restructuring my company that I had been building for years. And here was an opportunity for me to actually step into full time entrepreneurship. And so a lot of people often say when you're an entrepreneur, but you're still working a full time job, how do you know when it's time to quit? And I got to a place where I realized I have no choice, but to quit because I'm working 40-hour weeks and I'm adding about an extra 20 hours to that week doing corporate wellness. So that was not sustainable for me. And so by December of 2020, I had made the decision to quit my full time job and step into entrepreneurship full time. And that is when I created Minaa B Consulting, where I work with organizations to help them develop psychological safety and become inclusive of mental health. And what my work does is I do consulting for organizations. And so sometimes that could look like me conducting employee listening sessions depending on different things that are happening in the workforce, whether there's conflict or whether there was a mass layoff, providing care and support. Also, me leading workshops on a variety of mental health topics from burnout to anxiety in the workplace to psychological safety in the workplace, or focusing on Black mental health in the workplace, especially if I'm working with Black ERGs. Another thing that I will do is the coaching element now. And that is something that is newer for me, where I started taking on coaching for not just corporate clients, but the general public, where I work in the corporate space. I am working with women who are in leadership positions, but outside of the corporate space, I am working with women in general who are just looking to cultivate healthier skills to develop assertiveness, to develop healthier, holistic wellness practices that allow them to have a greater sense of peace in life and feel a greater sense of control, I guess, or feel that their mental health is more manageable. So, really giving them the skills that they need to set better boundaries, to give them skills that they need to overcome issues like imposter syndrome or to manage anxiety in the workplace or in their everyday life, to give them the tools that they need to develop healthier romantic or even platonic relationships, because I am community care focused and my work doesn't just focus on romantic partnership. It focuses on building a healthy community structure and having a network of people that you can go to for support. So that is where my coaching for the general public comes in, but that's very much tied to the corporate wellness work that I do.
Yeah, it sounds like your book, Owning Our Struggles, brings together a lot of that. And so I would love to dig into some of the principles you talk about in that book. I know that we're going to talk about some of the kind of like business side of things, like how to grow your social media and things like that. But I think that a lot of the reason that you're so successful with social media and with coaching and corporate is that you have good content you're offering. And so if we start with kind of that content, then it's everything else flows from there. So tell us
Mhm.
about owning our struggles and some of the things that you discuss in that.
So, when I wrote Owning Our Struggles, I really wanted to build a foundation for the reader. And so, what I did was the chapters build upon each other, where chapter one focuses on childhood. And then chapter two takes us into adulthood and how things that we experienced in childhood can have an impact on our social, emotional, and mental health in adulthood. And then chapter three and beyond takes us on a journey through the different facets of adulthood that we all have to experience. So, chapter three focuses primarily on race and our identity. Chapter four focuses on parent child relationships or even just family relationships in general. Chapter five focuses on our romantic relationships as well as our friendships, where chapter six focuses on our relationship to work. Because, as I said earlier, work is something that we have to engage in. It is a system that is required in order for us to care for ourselves. So, I really wanted to make sure that I was taking the reader on a journey where they were first exploring their own childhood and being reflective through chapter one, understanding about those primitive years, ages 0 to 5, and how those early stages of life can form our adulthood in many different ways. If we're exposed to trauma during that age, what it does to the brain. Understanding that by age three, 80% of our brain is already developed. And so it's important, yes, for young children to be learning their ABCs and their one, two, threes, but it's also important for them to understand love, trust, safety, nurture, and care. And so, really giving the reader an ability to drill into their own childhood, to reflect and think about, did I grow up in a home where there was family cohesion, where there was psychological safety, where there was trust, where we engaged in healthy conflict building, where we communicated? Did I have those things? Or did I not have those things? And that introduces the reader to the ACE questionnaire, the adverse childhood experiences, where it gives them an ability to reflect on the adverse experiences they may have had during their childhood so that they can have a better understanding of their starting point and how some of the issues that might be plaguing them now stem back to their childhood. So that's why chapter one was so fundamental for me as a writer, because I think often adults tend to feel like they don't have to reflect on their childhood. And maybe, for example, if you're nervous about doing a presentation at work, maybe that's not the work that we're going to do. We're not going to really reflect deeply on your childhood. We're going to talk about the anxiety that comes with doing a presentation. But when you tell me that you consistently have unsatisfying relationships, you have unsatisfying friendships, you tend to feel like you're less than, you tend to feel like you're not worthy, I am going to be a little more curious to know what you dealt with in your childhood and what your family dynamics were like. So that's why chapter one was fundamental. And then, like I said, it builds upon there because when we think of community care, again, I want people to be thinking about the social systems that we engage in. And I want people to be thinking about their social infrastructure. So I want you to be thinking about relationships, not just on an individualistic level, but our relationships to systems as well as our social environment and how that impacts us. And so that's why those other chapters were so fundamental to introduce to the reader so that they can have a full understanding of the spectrum of community care, because often a lot of people think community care means I just need more friends. And that's actually not what it means. It's a spectrum of care that helps people have interpersonal relationships, but also bridges out to the social infrastructure that we engage in and knowing the professional resources that we can lean on to, be better individuals. And so those are the things that I wanted my readers to grasp.
Mm. As a therapist, I can tell you from experience that having the right EHR is an absolute lifeline. I recommend using therapy notes. They make billing, scheduling, note taking, telehealth, and e prescribe incredibly easy. Best of all, they offer live telephone support that's available 7 days a week. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research and see for yourself. Therapy Notes is the #1 highest rated EHR system available today, with a 4.9 out of 5 stars on trustpilot.com and on Google. All you have to do is click the link below or type promo code Joe on their website over at therapynotes.com and receive a special 2-month trial absolutely free. Again, that's therapynotes.com and use promo code Joe on the website. If you're coming from another EHR, Therapy Notes will also import your demographic data quick and easy at no cost, so you can get started right away. Trust me, don't waste any more of your time and try Therapy Notes. Just use promo code Joe at checkout. Now, I know that one of the challenges of writing a book is then kind of taking that into bite-sized moments that you can use on social media. How have you used the information that you gathered or the thought and planning that you put together for the book? How has that impacted the way you, say, approach an Instagram reel or different posts that you do on Instagram?
So, one of the things I know is that people attention spans are getting shorter day by day, especially with the introduction of different formats that are being introduced on social media. So at one point, Instagram, we all know where all we had to do was post a static post in our feed, and that was the most popular thing that you can do. Now, Instagram has grown to people uploading reels, and a reel is only 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or 90 seconds. So you only have 90 seconds to really pull someone in and make a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. And so for me, I try to pay attention to what's happening in my social climate. understanding my demographics, because you can go on social media and see the ages as well as the genders and the locations people are following you from. So for the first thing I do is I try to pay attention to things that are impacting folks within that demographic. So because I have a lot of people who are millennials and Gen Z following me, I will tailor my content to fit the needs of that population. So right now in my book, I have a variety of topics I talk about, but you might see me talking a lot about friendships right now if you go on my social media channel or if you go on my podcast and see some of the episodes. You might see more episodes tailored around friendships, because right now we're living in a world where a lot of people have expressed that friendships are hurting. A lot of people are dealing with friendship breakups. A lot of people are complaining that they don't know how to make friends, or it feels hard to make friends. So that's one of the tools that I've learned as a content creator, to make sure that I'm delivering information to my audience and touching those pain points, because that's the information that they're looking for. Another thing is I really like to make sure my information is bite sized and tangible, because social media, unfortunately, is not a place where many people can have nuanced conversations. So I like to make sure that what I put out is very succinct, because that's why I launched my podcast, so that if there are particular topics that I want to go really in depth with, then I'll talk about it on my podcast. But I'll take maybe a small snippet from my podcast to promote it on social media, because I know it's a snippet that is very generalized and I think it can reach a lot of people. It can be relatable to other people without requiring so much nuance, you know? So, those are some tactics that I've learned to really help grow my social media following, but also make sure that my content continues to be engaging to those who are coming across it.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, when you think about kind of how you plan, kind of where you're headed, so you started this podcast in February of 24. Like, how are you thinking through kind of the next level of growth for you?
So, right now, I'm in a place where I really am craving long form content. And that is why I started my podcast. I had been very hesitant about starting it because of the logistics that go into making a podcast. And so I said to myself, what would I need to do to make this podcast work for me? So, my podcast is a solo show. And I really wanted it to be a solo show, one, because logistically it's easier. I don't have to do the work of scouting for guests and interviewing guests and making sure guests have proper equipment and all of the things that go into working with guests, because I've hosted other podcasts before for other companies, and their format was working with guests, but the producer normally did all of that stuff. I don't have a producer, believe it or not. I
Hmm.
produce my own show. I edit my own show. I do everything. So I had to say to myself, what's going to be easy for me? And that's something that I think about a lot when it comes to planning out the projects that I have to continue to grow my consulting company or to just continue to grow my brand. What is going to be sustainable for me in the long term? Because statistics show that most people give up on their podcast after the 20th episode, and I'm here at episode 34, which will be releasing this upcoming Tuesday. So I do think that it's important for me to just be mindful of what I need and what is going to be sustainable for me. So that's why I chose to do a solo show, because it's easier for me to write the script for that. It's easier for me to produce and edit that. And it's also going to help me with my long term goal of really wanting to attract more clients by positioning myself as an expert. I do want to grow my podcast to a place where I can take it on the road and maybe have mini podcast tours. And that's another long term goal of mine. But that also goes back to what's easy for me. And if I'm doing this solo, then it allows my audience to develop a more nurturing connection with me. I'm also doing a lot of work to grow and cultivate my newsletter. So my newsletter is also called Mindful with Mina, because it's paired with the podcast. And so that's another area where people can sign up. They can head to my website and sign up for my newsletter, where that is a resource that I send out bi-weekly to give people more, again, long form content that is really hard to give on Instagram, because Instagram is more so built for, I would say, it's kind of like snacks that we digest throughout the day. And what I mean by that is, we snack on a post, we read it, we digest it for a little bit, but then we find ourselves still feeling hungry for more information, which is why we go back and we scroll and we scroll and we scroll. So for me, I am thinking long term in the context of, I know my audience is craving information that's going to help them on their healing journey. The reality is, reading bite sized posts every day may not necessarily be the thing that gets you there. It is a part of the building block, but it's not going to be the full course. And so I want to start building out more full course things that I know are going to leave my audiences satiated. And I do feel like my podcast and my newsletter is a part of that. And my book, of course, is a part of that too.
Mm. I love when you were talking about your podcast, you started with easy. When we have our Done For You podcast clients, one thing we have them do is we have them do 5 episodes that are solo shows. We have them do 5 interview shows, and then we recommend they do 5 interviews with their ideal clients. So, if you're working with, one coaching, niche that you have is women that are working on relationships in some way. So it might be that you're interviewing 5 women that are your ideal client and then like digging into that almost like a live coaching session. And what's great about that is then, you've got 15 episodes and you can really figure out like what's easier for you. Like I realized for myself that a solo show feels like 10 times more work than a guest show. So to show up, chat with you for 10 minutes beforehand, I've looked at your website, learned about you, and then just have a conversation. For me, I'm doing 5 of these today. And it's like super easy for me to do. When I'm done, then I hand it off to the team. They're doing all the booking. So we've got that infrastructure so that all the things you're talking about that would be difficult when you're first starting, of having a producer, of having an editor, having, someone scheduling and finding guests, like over time, we've been able to say, okay, I don't, as Joe, the host of the show, I don't want to be doing this aspect of it, and slowly taking things off my plate, where I can then show up and do 5 episodes and literally it takes less than 5 hours, and then that content is out there. So I think it's so smart that you started with like, how can I just start this? Because I think so many people get paralyzed by perfection, or they compare what they think their podcast should be to someone else. The thing that makes podcasts stand out is doing it your way. If you just copy everyone else's methods, it's not going to stand out. There's people like
Mhm.
Joe Rogan that have 3-hour podcasts. I'm not the audience for that. I don't have a commute. I literally walk my daughter to school and talk to her on the way there, and I don't listen to any music on the way back, and just kind of try to mindfully walk back if I'm not worried about my day. And so it's like I'm not his ideal audience. But there are people that obviously do like that. And so I think it's so awesome that you started with like what's easy for you. As you look at the podcast, you've passed where most podcasts fade. You've overcome pod fading. How are you thinking about, like, what have you learned maybe in the first 34 episodes of your podcast?
Hmm. I loved everything that you just said. And I think one of the things that I learned is, make it fun for you. For me, I do have a good time building out my scripts, doing the research on figuring out what I want to talk about. And I also have my podcast capped at 30 minutes. And so a 3 hour podcast, you would never hear me talking alone for 3 hours. Honestly, I would never even be a guest on a show that's going to have my time for 3 hours. That's really intense. So I learned that, again, what is going to make this easy, but also what is going to make this fun. And what makes it fun is me being able to talk about certain topics and bring in my own personal experiences to those topics that I'm talking about. If I can relate to that topic, or if I have a story that relates to the topic at hand, I like to showcase a little more about who I am. And I think that's also what makes it fun as a solo show. I don't know, I don't have to be on a microphone for an hour or 2 hours long. I can literally just make my point in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Sometimes my podcasts are even 15 minutes, depending on the topic. And people love it. that's the funnier part, right? Where I was asking myself all of these questions in the beginning. Are people going to want short form podcasts? Are people going to want to listen to a solo show? So it's so funny having all of those thoughts, but then deciding just do it. And
Hmm.
whoever does want it will listen to you. And those who don't want it, there's a plethora of other podcasts for them to find. So really challenging myself, I think, has been a part of the growth and the fun for me as well. Because I had so many doubts in the beginning and I had to just push through and say, you got to do it and do what works for you and build the audience that also likes this format. So I think that's something that I've learned within the 30 plus episodes that I've created, just how to be true to myself, how to make this a fun process. I also will say on the logistical end, I make sure I batch record my podcast because it's not sustainable to do a podcast once a week if you know your podcast is airing once a week. So that also helps with building up the podcast as well because it doesn't feel like an act of labor since there's so much planning that's going into it with me batch recording a lot of the content. But I do think that it's something that's new for me. And I think what it taught me is be willing to try and see where it takes you. And the fact that so many people are loving it and always leaving comments, like I love that's honestly my favorite part of this process when I go on Spotify and I see the comments that people leave on under each episode. That warms my heart, to see how people are really reacting to these episodes and why they love it and how they're sharing their own stories and experiences with it. Because I always leave a call to action at the end of every podcast for people to answer a prompt, and they actually do it. So I know they're listening up until the end. And
Mm.
so, I think that's what has been extremely fun for me. And it's played a role in the things that I've just learned within my 30 plus episodes. Just do what feels good to you and build upon that. You don't have to do what other people are doing for it to be what works. Sometimes you can have your own method and your own formula, and that's what's going to work for you and the audience that you are trying to cater to. So I think that's one of the things that I would say I've learned this year or at least within the last year of me being a podcast host.
I love it. Mina, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that you can follow the non traditional route. And when I was, and the reason why I say that is because when I was going to NYU, we were taught to go into private practice and kind of find our clients in the traditional way of maybe building a Psychology Today profile or just putting our name on a directory, getting referrals, and that's it. No one told me about social media. No one told me that you can advertise yourself on Instagram. Nobody told me you can advertise yourself on a podcast. Nobody also told me that when you're not seeing clients, you can also get corporate contracts and become a keynote speaker and lead workshops. Like there's a variety of things that you can do outside of private practice that can also bring you clients to your private practice. So I just want private practice owners to know that there are so many paths to success, not just the path that we're taught when we're in grad school.
So awesome. If people want to get your book, if they want to connect with you, if they want to listen to your podcast, where should we send them?
You can head to my website, MinaaB.com. Mina is spelled Minaa. B.com. You can head to my website and order my book. My podcast is also linked on my website. And also, you can sign up for my newsletter, Mindful with Mina, where I send out bi weekly content to keep you updated on different things that are happening, as well as new podcast episodes but being released and other projects that I'm working on.
So awesome. Mina, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you, Joe.
Mina is such a great example of kind of what we talk about a lot of, there's parts of our business that it's a recipe. It's just like follow these steps and it works. A lot of that when you're first starting a practice, people that are in next level practice or sustainable solo practice, like it's step by step. It's follow this. There's some creativity. But then there's other parts that instead of a recipe being the metaphor, it's spaghetti at the wall. We're seeing what sticks for you emotionally, what gives you joy, what's easy, what resonates with people. And maybe this year a podcast is that thing. And we haven't talked about this in a while, but over at podcastlaunchschool.com, we have our course, Podcast Launch School. You can also get it on Teachable. And that's going to be a 12-part course, high-quality video, walking you through all the ins and outs of starting a podcast. Kind of the next step up is we have support services for podcasters. So if you're like Minaa and you already have a podcast and you're looking to outsource the show notes, have a sound editing team at a reasonable price, it's around $100 an episode, depending on which plan you get, if you want extra support beyond kind of the show notes and the sound and all of that. And then we also have Done For You, where literally we help walk you through start to finish, launching your podcast, getting your first episodes going. We do all the behind the scenes to help you launch a podcast. So over at podcastlaunchschool.com, you can read more about that. We do have a couple openings to take on podcasters. So please do that. If now, reach out to us. If that's a New Year's goal, go over to podcastlaunchschool.com. Also, we couldn't do this show without our amazing sponsors. Therapy Notes has been a long-time sponsor. It's the best electronic health records out there. Over and over, we hear from people that there's a bunch of EHRs that sold last year or the year before, and those EHRs are just not as good as they used to be. That those founders had awesome visions for them, but now that these bigger corporations have them, they're not serving their people as well. If you're ready to switch this year and start new and try a new EHR, Therapy Notes will walk you through that process. I actually just had a large group practice switch over, and they said that it was so much easier than they thought it would be. There's a couple kinks that happened, but that's bound to happen. But the team over at Therapy Notes did an amazing job helping them switch over. So head on over to therapynotes.com. Use promo code Joe at checkout to get a couple months for free. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.